Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Jennifer Wright, and as you hopefully already know by now, you're in the session Getting to Happy for Morale Boosting Initiatives for Library Staff. I'm very excited about this session and to talk with you all today. As has been mentioned, I do have time saved for questions at the end of this session. So I will ask that if you have some questions, maybe you jot them down and we'll try to address all of those at the end rather than stopping throughout the presentation. I'm also going to stop my video right now and just share my screen, and that's so that the video won't be distracting. But when I answer questions a bit later, I'll make sure that you can see my face again. Please let me know if you're having any technical issues by indicating to our facilitators through the chat, and I'll be happy to address those. So let's get started. My name is Jennifer Wright, and I work for a great library system here in South Carolina in Spartanburg, and I'm in charge of staff training and strategic planning here. I have included my contact information in this presentation, but it's actually on the last slide so that you can have it right at the end in case you'd like to email or call me with any questions. I'm happy to answer those. As you know, the title of this presentation is Getting to Happy. So I want to give a little shout out to the session title Inspiration, which is actually a Terry McMillan book, the sequel to Waiting to Exhale. So if you haven't read that, you get a book recommendation along with this title. Thanks again for joining. So today I want to start with a simple quote. Customer satisfaction, or in our case, of course, patron satisfaction, starts with employee satisfaction. So let's just start by asking, what is employee satisfaction? I think the simplest definition really is it's just how happy or content our employees, our staff are feeling in their jobs at the library. So on the next couple slides, I'm going to throw out a few facts really quickly. They're from the Society for Human Resource Management. That organization puts out a report titled Employee Job Satisfaction and Engagement, Revitalizing a Changing Workforce. And its whole purpose is to identify factors that influence how our employees feel satisfaction and engagement in the workplace. And it's really just great insight as we move into this idea of developing staff satisfaction initiatives for our staff. So typically, there are multiple factors affecting employee satisfaction and engagement, and those can be considered two sides of the same coin. But these include things like opportunities for career development, we'll touch on that, different types of benefits, compensation, a comfortable and supportive work environment, which is huge, and then employee and manager relationships. And if you notice the second graphic here, relationships is also a key factor in these conditions for engagement, along with things like opportunities and meaningfulness. Now, I know there's a lot on this slide, so I just want to go ahead and take the opportunity to reiterate that you will get a copy of these slides. So we're going to be covering a lot of information today, and I want to reassure you that all of that is going to be contained in the slides and then in various handouts that I will mention. So increased staff satisfaction levels within your organization, they really create a number of benefits for your library. Now, I want to say that I really believe that library leaders should invest in staff satisfaction initiatives simply because we care about, love, appreciate our employees. But especially if you're in administration or management, we also have to be aware that there are very real world benefits to this investment. So I've listed just a few on this slide. Employees with high satisfaction, they show improved productivity and creativity, as well as improved customer service. Again, so important to libraries, very relevant to our patrons. Staff satisfaction also benefits our organization by reducing turnover and recruitment costs. Those can be big problems for our libraries. So I could honestly spend an entire presentation talking about the research behind staff satisfaction, but that would be boring. And we're not going to do that. So let's move ahead and get to the meat of this presentation, which is actually some practical projects you can undertake, that we've undertaken here to bolster staff satisfaction. So from this point on, I'm just going to assume that we all know staff satisfaction is awesome, it's important, and I want to spend the majority of our time sharing some experiences that my library where I work has had in developing staff satisfaction initiatives. So we're going to talk about implementing a staff satisfaction survey to sort of start the process. And then we're going to examine 3 programs, and those are a staff scholarship, staff appreciation awards, and then finally a badging system for staff training. This is a lot of information, but to be honest, I wanted this presentation to have all the aspects that I love in a conference presentation, which is that it's fast paced, there's a lot of varied information, and it's super practical. So I'm really hoping I can achieve that goal for you today. So let's get started. All right, let's talk staff satisfaction survey. This, I'm calling it gathering vital feedback, because a good first step is gathering this important information from your employees before you start doing anything else. The idea of a staff satisfaction survey is obviously to be able to gauge how staff are feeling about their work and about the organization. Not just during COVID, of course, but during more peaceful times as well. Now, I recognize, I just want to say off the bat, this process can be intimidating, especially if you're a busy manager or administrator. And also because anytime you do a survey like this, you kind of open yourself up to constructive criticism, and also maybe to things that you'll feel are undeserved criticism. And so as human beings, we might tend to focus on the negative, but really 99% of your feedback is probably going to be great. And I'll talk more about that later. And studies have shown that when organizations like ours encourage upward communication through tools like employee surveys, people tend to have higher levels of commitment, satisfaction, productivity. So actually, somehow miraculously, just the act of soliciting your staff's opinions can often be a first step towards increasing their morale in a way. And of course, you can use those facts about upward communication when selling this concept to other people, to administration, to your bosses, even to your board if necessary. And I do want to note that at SCPL, we do not have to get board permission to do things like this, but I do recognize that some boards maintain a lot tighter control. So I want to acknowledge that. So in each of my sections, I'm going to talk about getting buy-in at different levels. So first of all, for the staff satisfaction survey, the proposal really probably needs to come from someone in administration or a high-level manager. If you don't fit those categories, that's fine. Just talk to someone who does, sell them on the project. And then if you do fit into one of those areas, honestly, the fastest way to get buy-in from admin to do a survey like this is just to volunteer to be the point person who will create the survey, collect responses, write up the report afterwards. And that's really because most people warm up to an idea a lot faster, I think, if they don't actually have to do more work related to it. To get buy-in from your staff, the most important factor, I believe, is trust. The responses have to be anonymous. The staff have to believe that the system's truly going to protect their anonymity. They also need to know that someone's actually going to read their responses and have some faith probably that the survey is going to result in action. So in other words, whoever is your survey point person, they need to be somebody with credibility and trust in your library. All right, so now I'm going to talk survey design. I just want to say that just because I'm doing a conference presentation does not mean that I think that our survey or any of our programs are perfect. I know they're not, because I put a lot of these things together, but they are based on research and on similar surveys for organizations. So if you don't really love my survey example, just go out on the internet, do some research, send out an email to your state library listserv, and you can find comparable things to use. Our survey uses the SurveyMonkey software, which I love, but just remember that if you're limited with budget, free options like Google surveys, they do exist. And sometimes some of them just require a little bit more technical knowledge. I love SurveyMonkey because it's so easy to use, it's so versatile, it protects anonymity. We have a subscription that costs $372 per year. I always like to know what everything costs, so I assume you do too. They have varying other subscription levels though, so you can get things that are pricier or ones that are a little bit cheaper. So as I mentioned, SurveyMonkey does allow us to collect responses automatically, but on our staff satisfaction survey, we do ask some demographic information because I love demographic information. It lets you do more data analysis and look for trends after the fact. However, I will say this, our library is big enough that asking these demographic questions will not reveal a respondent's identity. If you have a small staff, think carefully about what demographic questions you want to include so that nobody gives away who they are. All right, I know this is a lot on this slide. You do not have to read all this text, so just kind of follow along as I talk you through it. Remember that you will actually get a handout, and I guess if we could go ahead and we can drop the handout into chat if you want. I took a handout and I just put exactly what we have as our survey into that handout, so you can use it as a template if you want. So we have these Likert scale questions. I have a lot of opinions about Likert scales that I won't share with you, but basically our Likert scale options are strongly agree to strongly disagree with a middle option of undecided. You want undecided over neutral because people are less likely to select undecided than the neutral. And of course, you really don't want them selecting that middle option because it doesn't really give you relevant information. Likert scale questions are super, they're great to answer, easy, require minimal thought, and then they're also easy for you to analyze afterwards. So here are the questions on the slide that are included in this section on our survey. They're also in the handout. I won't read all these, but what I want you to notice is we're not just asking for a rating of satisfaction overall, but rather each question should pertain to a topic area that research has identified as key to overall satisfaction. So what I mean by that is questions that indicate someone's understanding of organizational mission, supervisor relationship, how do they perceive opportunities for advancement, and so forth. But we're not done yet. There is a part 2. So we also have some open-ended questions on our survey. They're at the end of the Likert scale section. And optional questions are indicated with the word optional, as well as SurveyMonkey also indicates required questions with an asterisk. So it makes it really clear for people. I want to take a moment to address these questions. This is actually where you get some of your best data. Of course, some people are going to write in there, they're just going to say, oh, I can't think of anything, or can we, if you say, can we do anything better? They'll say nothing or all good. So those you'll just set aside. But also you'll get very many thoughtful and detailed responsibles that can provide you with information to analyze for your final report, to generate a word cloud, ideas that you might actually end up implementing. So I've already talked about anonymity, but I want to repeat here how important it is to use a survey methodology that really ensures your anonymity, and then to make sure that staff know that when you're advertising the survey. Required versus optional. So our staff satisfaction survey is optional, and I strongly believe that it should be optional. First of all, if a survey is anonymous, how are you going to know whether somebody actually took it or not to make it required? So there's that thing. And then I also feel that trying to require that people complete a survey takes away some of the goodwill surrounding the very idea of a staff satisfaction survey. So all you really need is a large enough sample to be representative of your staff, and you can typically get that. During that 2 months that we do the survey, I send out reminders pretty much every week, and that way people, hassle them a little bit, but it's always on their mind. And instead of pushing the survey as required, I just point out that it's their opportunity to be heard and share their thoughts, and people love it when they think about that. Prior to the survey, I also like to create a little video that summarizes changes that were made as a result of the last survey. I started doing that to remind people that we do take action in the areas that they mention, and also so that everyone can go in and answer this year with awareness about what happened from last year. So you certainly don't have to invest the time in creating a video. Of course, you could just email something out to staff, and that would work just as well. And then a note here about the frequency of the survey. I was doing them every year, but then I started to see that staff got burnt out. We had fewer responses. And so I decided to make them every other year. So we skip a year, do one, skip a year, do one. And that's, I think, going to work out better as far as participation. Once your deadline for responding to the survey has passed and you've got all your data, of course, it's time to work with that data. I included a picture here of one of the reports that I did that I just really liked how it turned out. I used Canva, which is a free graphic design service on the internet. And I was kind of excited because yesterday I attended a session and someone mentioned Canva in that one as well. So check out Canva if you have a chance. All right, but first, as far as data, I recommend only sharing the full data with top-level administrators, which in our case includes HR. So even though the survey is anonymous, you're going to get respondents who identify themselves or name other people in their responses. And especially if it's someone maybe criticizing a staff member who's not pulling their weight or something their manager did, that information does not need to go out to everyone. So those issues could be handled directly if needed and privately. So don't put that in there. And then for system managers and others in leadership, I like to create a more detailed report, but just edited as necessary to protect anonymity. And then for everybody, because I do think you should share this with everyone ultimately, that's where you're going to aggregate your data, report on high-level trends. And it's really good for staff to read this report because they get to see that there are a lot of conflicting priorities, that there are many diverse people. And I will add a final note about the results. You are going to get some people who complain maybe unreasonably about someone or something, or just express unhappiness. And it's human nature, I think, to focus on the negative, unproductive comments. But I really think that if you try this, you'll find, as we did, that actually the vast majority of your staff are really devoted to their work. They want to be part of a constructive and forward-thinking conversation, and that actually overall they're pretty satisfied with the library and working in the library profession. So I know that was already a lot of information. I hope y'all are still with me. We're going to move on to the next topic, but remember, if you have a question, just jot it down and I will make sure to respond to those at the end of this program. So we're going to move on and talk about a completely different type of staff satisfaction initiative, and that is starting a scholarship for your library staff who are attending school to get their master's in library and information science, or just library science. This one might also seem kind of intimidating to get off the ground, but I hope that once I've talked about this, more libraries will see how doable this can be, because it's really it can be very straightforward. So let's talk, as I'm going to do in each section, about getting buy-in. It's really easy to get buy-in from staff. Even staff who already have their library degree or aren't really interested in getting one, even those people, they tend to recognize that this type of program is beneficial for others. There's an amount of goodwill that's generated by these types of programs. So you don't have to sell them on it, but you do have to sell members of administration and or board members on the program possibly. So here are a few factors that you can point out to make your case. First of all, people without a library degree, we're talking paraprofessionals with a paraprofessional salary. And as we all know very well, you don't go into library to make a lot of money and get rich. And you especially don't in a paraprofessional position. Those folks are here because they love working in libraries. And then even with in-state tuition, many library programs, they cost in the realm of $5,000 to $7,000. So even a small scholarship can make a dent in tuition for a semester. And then also, whenever you're investing in professional development at any level, really you're investing in your organization's quality, you're investing in the future of the profession as a whole. I'll talk in the next slide about how our program actually involves a collaboration with friends of the library. If you have a friends group, then you already have a group of people who are really devoted to libraries, who love the idea of continuing the profession. And as you go into this kind of selling this to folks, if I can use that terminology, You'll want to be ready to answer some questions. And those are things like, does your library have a large enough pool of people in library school to be able to support a competitive scholarship? That's a big question. So if you only have a library of perhaps 20 or 30 people, that should be your first question. Of course, I can't answer that for you, but that should be your consideration. Questions that you'll get will also be like, what if a person leaves after they've received a scholarship? What if the person selected is not a high performer? What if no one applies? Where will the money come from? So I'm going to kind of try to address how we handled some of these, and hopefully that will give you some insight into what you could do. Obviously, the biggest question when you're starting a program like this is, where is the money coming from? So unfortunately, this is where I may not be able to give you a great answer, because it really depends on your organization. So we are using a combination of an existing budget and then matching funds from Friends of the Library, because it's often, and I know many of you have experienced this if you're in administration or management, to get donors to match funds is often easier than getting people to just straightforward shell out some money. So we have a matching thing going on right now. I'll show you those numbers in just a minute. But your library might have other revenue streams that you could use. Maybe you could do fundraising, or there has been fundraising for professional development. You could kind of piggyback on that. If you have an endowment of some kind, where part of the annual revenue from that could be earmarked for this. If you maybe have an existing budget that you could take from a couple different budgets and combine them, so forth. So just think about that in terms of how you can get creative. And I do want to recognize here that many libraries right now are just absolutely devastated financially because of the pandemic. So if you can't do this right now, just keep it on your plate and think about it and prepare for it. And perhaps you can do it in the coming fiscal years. But this is what we have going on at SCPL. We have 2 scholarships. We offer them twice per year. So we've got 2 scholarships, one for the fall semester, one for the spring semester. It's kind of confusing to explain. And we split the cost between my continuing education budget, which we're really lucky to have. I want to recognize that. And then we get $1,000 from our Friends of the Library. And they actually make all of their money, well, pretty much all of their money, from the sale of donated and weeded books. So that's something I think that's doable for a lot of libraries, is to have your friends raise money that way. And then, at some point, I would love to increase the scholarship amounts. One of the most discouraging things that I promise you will hear when you first start something like this is, well, that's not really very much money. But remember, you have to have a starting point, and doing something is better than doing nothing at all. And if we could pay for everybody to go to library school for free, we would, I'm sure, but that's just not feasible. So you have to start with what you can do. So at this point, I will mention, and perhaps we can drop this handout into the chat as well. I have included, once again, I just included everything that we use for our scholarship program. And that is a applicant packet, and then also some instructions for the members of the scholarship selection committee. So in the interest of giving you as much detail as possible, I crowded up my slides a little more than I like to normally, but I am including excerpts from our scholarship application packet. So let's talk briefly about the purpose of the scholarship, because ours is fairly narrow. It's just books and tuition. And I kind of like that because it's keeping it simple. And that's going to be kind of the rule probably that you need to live by if you want to start any of these programs, is start simple and then build up to something more complicated if you feel the need. And then you'll see from the description here that we actually disperse our funds as a reimbursement. If I have any finance people in here, you probably know why. And that is because the recipient then does not have to pay taxes on the scholarship funds. And also, since it's a reimbursement, the library receives a copy of, the tuition receipt, the textbook receipt, and then we know exactly what we're paying for, and we can keep that on our books. And I also have the eligibility requirements, can't say that, on here, and those look like that. Again, sorry about all the text on this slide, but just wanted to include as much detail as possible. we kept those simple too. You don't want to complicate this too much, or you'll find yourself without any applicants. You'll notice that there's no requirement that a recipient remains employed with the library for a certain period of time after receiving the scholarship. That's very important to me personally, because not only are those kind of requirements, some companies do that, but it's on shaky legal and ethical ground, but it's also really bad for staff satisfaction, which is what we're trying to bolster, right? And then, it's just, I don't know. I don't like the idea at all of having someone forced to stay at the library, because part of boosting staff satisfaction through these programs is creating an environment where people want to stay, not where they're forced to stay. So that's in there. I'd also like to note here, a person cannot receive the scholarship in 2 consecutive semesters. They can reapply later, though, and potentially receive it again. So we were trying to make it fair there, but also allow ourselves to make sure we had a good number of applicants each semester. So those are things you can play with if you want to set this up at a larger library or at a smaller library. You're probably going to play around with your eligibility requirements a little bit more to help limit or manage your applicant base. So that's just the first page of the library school scholarship application. It has a first page that has all of that sort of introductory information. And then the next page is very simple. It's the actual application packet, which is just a fillable Word document. And once again, I feel strongly that simplicity is going to be your friend here. Studies have shown that increasing the complexity of scholarship applications, doing things like requiring references, for example, those can actually exacerbate inequities among applicants, and they can have a disproportionate impact, especially on your minority applicants. So beyond a few preliminary questions, our main part of the application is a short essay. And I certainly would not claim that this is the greatest essay question of all time. We'll probably change it up periodically, but right now it's basically just to answer the question, how do you aspire to contribute to the field of library science as an information professional? And, that's something that's broad enough for most applicants with diverse interests. And it's something that pretty much every library school student has to think about at a certain point. So that's what we're going with right now. All right, now that we've discussed the application packet, I have another slide full of information for you. That's because I want to talk about the instructions for the Scholarship Selection Committee. Our committee is composed of members of our Friends of the Library and our board. And you do need to make sure that your committee members are people who are external to the organization for legal and ethical purposes. The selection committee also should really only receive the essays themselves, no identifying information. So I go through first and remove anything that might indicate whether it was a man or a woman who wrote the essay, whether it might indicate the person's race and so forth, as much as I can. And just to hammer home how important blind review of these essays is, one of our committee members was really convinced that our last winning essay was written by a man, and then was just super surprised to learn that it was written by a woman. And I'm not sure why she shared that with me, but I just thought, here's another example of how there could be just an opportunity there for discrimination potentially. Blind review is very important. So take all the demographics out, age, anything like that. Take that out as much as you can. And you'll also notice that here on the slide at the very bottom, I borrowed the wording from another organization's scholarship application mainly, but I really liked having a note there about non-native English speakers. They should not be evaluated for grammar and spelling, punctuation errors, and so forth. We haven't had this particular situation yet. Although we have some bilingual staff, we don't have anyone who's applied who is not a native English speaker. But you want to make sure that as much as possible, you remove opportunities for discrimination in this process. And that leads me to some just lessons learned so far. So the scholarship process, I believe, really, collecting your essays, getting the selection committee together, selecting a recipient, all that is actually fairly straightforward. You just have to get the approval, and of course the financing, and then you have to be organized. So I just want to run through a few additional lessons learned. Focus on diversity in the scholarship selection committee. This makes a big difference. If you want more information about why I'm saying that, I can privately email with you, but really after here, when you sit there and you hear people talk on the committee, it becomes very clear how important diverse perspectives are for people as they are analyzing other people's writing. And if you receive many applications, so we are kind of in a sweet spot where we're getting a manageable number of applications. If you work for a very large library system and you don't have a program like this already, you may need to actually narrow it down, perhaps based on who actually answered the question as it was asked or something like that. Narrow it down to 3 to 4 for the committee, because our committee members have said that more than 4 would be too many for them to review. They're busy professionals, so that's something to think about. When you're in the meeting, so I sit in on the scholarship selection committee meeting, but I just don't talk as much as possible. I don't share opinions or anything like that. But do make sure that you kind of go around as the facilitator and allow everyone to speak, because some will try to dominate. And then make sure you're keeping members of admin and the applicants themselves looped into the process. I've sat on a scholarship committee before where it took forever for the applicants to be notified about whether they got it or they didn't got it. Don't drag it out. Just let them know as soon as you know. And then one thing that I did that I really liked is I wrote down notes from the scholarship committee discussion. And then afterward, I asked the applicants if they would like those notes, so that if they didn't win it this time and they wanted to reapply, they could sort of incorporate some of that feedback for next time. And many of them liked that. All right, I am going to take just a second and glance at our chat here. Perfect. Okay. And this is all I'm going to say about library school scholarship. But once again, I do want to say that I will offer the opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. So we're going to keep powering along here. And that means we're getting to Staff Appreciation Awards, one of my favorite topics. This program can be very popular with your staff. If you don't have a program, I have some, of course, description of what ours looks like. And then if you have one, but you're thinking about revamping it, not only will I share my ideas, but I would love to hear your ideas in the chat as well at the end of this presentation. And I have to give credit to the fact that our program borrows from other people. So we took bits and pieces from like the library at the University of Florida. I like their categories. We adapted some of those and so forth. So everybody builds on each other's work here. So let's talk about getting buy-in. On the one hand, you think getting buy-in for a staff appreciation award, that's easy, right? Who doesn't think staff should be appreciated? Yes, but when you start developing the program, that's when you run into differing opinions, perspectives about different types of awards and what an award is and so forth. And the reality is people are motivated by different types of rewards. So this is just kind of a funny anecdote from my workplace. Admin used to present our staff with a plaque for a certain number of years of service. And then they heard that staff would actually like to have money, not the plaque. I know I would. So, so they were like, okay. So they started giving money instead. But then a while back, I heard from one employee, and she was upset about not getting a plaque. So she took the money that she was given and she went out and she bought herself a plaque with it. And that just is kind of a story that reminds me that people value different rewards. And it's also part of the reason that our current program, they get a plaque and they get a gift card. So we try to get both people there, both types. And then I will also acknowledge that the selection process for staff appreciation awards, that is a challenge, because you don't want to select recipients at random. If you end up selecting someone who has performance problems, who doesn't do their job, then that is a morale killer for everyone who knows that. So you don't want to reward that, but you also want to remove the appearance of favoritism as much as possible. So our solution to this was to create a hybrid system of peer nominations. and then have some people select the recipient from among those nominations. So here we go. I got another big slide for you. All right, so here is the beginning of the nomination form that we send out to all our staff to collect nominees for our staff appreciation program. Every time we do a survey, any kind of survey, I like to introduce it with an email. And also this is, by the way, in SurveyMonkey again, which as I said is my favorite. But I like to introduce this before I send it out. So before staff get this, they have to read an explanatory email first and start creating the survey, and then they start filling out the survey form, thinking about who they want to nominate, all that kind of stuff, after they've kind of refreshed in their mind what this program is for. So among the handouts for the session, I have a document created summarizing the program for staff and explaining how it works. It's a document that I created for our staff, but I just decided to give it to you so you could see everything. So when staff click the link and they start the survey, they already have some background. And I want to say again that our categories for awards are based on existing staff appreciation programs out there. So those are not original to me. So if you don't really like how we've set up this program, you can go out there, do some research, and find many, many options. But we have 5 categories. As you can see from the screenshot on this slide, staff can nominate someone for only one category, or they can nominate different people for each of the 5 categories, but they cannot nominate themselves, and they cannot sort of stack the deck, if you will, by nominating the same person over and over and over. So now I've got another busy slide here. These are just a couple of additional screenshots from our nomination form. So I've got a little screenshot in the middle that I did not mean to have there actually, but you've got part 1 there in the middle, and then this slide is part 2. So you've got where the person can fill out their name. So you do want to get the name of the person who is doing the nominating, and then also the name of the person they are nominating. And then we have a number of different awards: the behind the scenes award, an innovation award, outreach award, customer service award, and equity, diversity, and inclusion award. And then I also make sure to include the definitions of each of these right next to where they select what award they're nominating the person for. And that's to hopefully make sure that they are nominating the person for the correct award, although I promise you that you'll actually still get some nominations that do not really fit into the category that they were listed in. And then finally, and probably most importantly, there on the right side, you see there's a text box for why are you nominating this person for this award. You know, and reading through these, I think you'll be so impressed, like I've been, by just the thoughtful and generous spirit of staff nominating their peers for these awards, because they just genuinely respect their coworkers and they love the work they're doing. And it can be inspirational just to read these. So after your deadline for nominations has passed, you'll be left with a spreadsheet of just all these great nominations, all these wonderful staff working on all these amazing projects and processes. And that's why the next step can be so challenging, because you actually have to pick your recipients at that point. So I did this in consultation with members of admin and HR, because in our organization, those folks tend to be familiar with a lot of people across the whole system. So you can pick and choose who you want to talk to. And as you try to narrow this down, some criteria that you could use to narrow down your field of nominees would be, you know, does this person have any documented performance issues? Well, then maybe this is not the year for them to get an award. Does the nominee actually fit into the category that they were nominated for, and so forth. And then also you can check in with their supervisors and just ask what they think about the nomination. Often they'll provide additional information for you. So you can usually narrow it down to some really standout candidates, but then at some point you are going to have to just make that tough decision and pick one. But I think that even though we can't award everyone every year, part of creating a culture of appreciation is also, you know, whether you're in training or HR, admin, management, whatever, include sort of a reminder to other managers that they should be expressing appreciation for their staff all the time and year round. And so that could be part of the culture of appreciation too, even if everyone cannot get an award. And then just a few other considerations for a program like this. Make sure you determine your prizes in advance and secure funding for those. Funding, I realize, is going to be, a problem for some folks. And we're fortunate enough to be able to do a little gift card and a plaque. But if you can't do that, I just would like to say get creative, because before I worked here at this library, they used to have what they called the Golden Ducky Awards, and people were given these rubber ducks that had been spray painted gold and glued to a plaque. And they were enormously popular. People still talk about them. There's a whole story behind them. So it's all about the presentation, the appreciation, and the fun. It doesn't matter if you don't have a huge budget. If you kind of sell it right and it's special and it's meaningful, people will be happy about a golden duck. So think about what your award's going to be, plan that ahead of time, and then how we present the award. Of course, the pandemic kind of messed that up. So I have a picture here of our poor folks in masks standing together for 2 seconds for a picture and then springing back to their 6 feet apart. But usually we will do this on like an annual staff day or something like that. All right, and we are just moving on to our last and shortest section here. And this one is actually about badging for staff training. I love staff training. It's part of what I do. So I just wanted to drop this one in here. You might wonder why I chose to drop this program in with others that promote satisfaction. And to be honest, I was really skeptical, for the idea of badging. I just thought, will we get any major results from it? Is it going to actually do anything? But we ended up getting a new learning management system, or LMS, and it made digital badging pretty easy. So I set that up and I've been amazed by the results. So I want to mention a few things about badging. It's also called micro-credentialing. Micro-credentials are just mini qualifications that can demonstrate, skills, knowledge, experience. People are putting these things on their LinkedIn, their Indeed profile now. And I remember as early as 2015, my training colleagues and I were talking about doing something like this. We actually did at one point physical badges, little metal pins, and they said things like, "Together we make a difference," and "Leading by example," and we'd give them out for certain things, and people loved those. I'll talk more about different types of badging programs in just a moment. But, badging is also one of ALA's Library of the Future initiative topics. There've been a bunch of articles written about it, and it's really just part of this trend of gamification in learning. Now, this is the one that I cannot actually give you a neat little handout that tells you exactly what we do and how to replicate it. But here is a screenshot of what our LMS looks like from the user perspective. From the admin side, when I make these, I can create a little icon, a description. I create a name for the badge, kind of like a goofy name sometimes, kind of silly name that also indicates what it is. I can assign it a certain number of points. And then, of course, I assign it to a course or courses that you have to complete before you get the badge. Now, I don't want to focus too much on the LMS. Our particular LMS is called Docebo. If you want to get into a discussion of learning management systems or costs, I'm happy to email you about that. So feel free to email me. But badging is doable. I just want to say it's doable, even if you do not have like a nice LMS and you can't spend that kind of money. So although my library is lucky to have an LMS, I just want to recognize that we don't all have that option. So even if your library does not have those resources, you can adapt this. You can do physical badges like we started out with. They can be lapel pins. If you can't buy lapel pins, if your library has a button maker, you can make buttons and make each of the, you have to design them first. You can use Canva for that if you want, print them out and then use those buttons. So your only cost there would be the actual physical cost of the button. If you have fabric or a maker space, you can do fabric patches. Digital badges, though, are even cheaper, and they can be created with a lot of different kinds of software. There's Badge OS, Adobe Spark, there's Canva, I mentioned, Credly. So you can explore some of those. And if anyone has a suggestion for that, feel free to drop it into the chat. So even if you don't have an LMS, you probably have a website or staff email. So you could assign a badge to a staff member via email. So if they complete their anti-racism training, then they get a badge that they can put on their email signature, or perhaps they could be uploaded to a website, maybe social media, but perhaps you have an internal web page on your website, or your intranet if you have an internal internet system, or if you have just even an online document, a Word document, I think could even work, where you copy paste the badges in, you track who has what, it becomes a little competition and people are still getting that idea behind the badges. So whatever the format, the goal there is to encourage training completion by encouraging a little bit of competition and a little bit of a feeling of accomplishment. So once we launched this program, I wanted to do some analysis and see if the badges were actually working. And so I did some data analysis of optional courses where people had to voluntarily sign up. And I found that courses with badges had a lot more completions. So an average of 8 staff completed each badged course, but then an average of only 2 staff completed non-badged courses. And overall, a course that had a badge, that was 4 times more likely to be completed. And so this was exciting because I intentionally connected the badges to trainings I really wanted staff to do. And that was stuff like health and safety, of course, during the pandemic, anti-racism and diversity training, conflict management, and so forth and so on. So it was effective in getting people to do those trainings. And then also the reason I'm talking about it in relation to morale is people had a lot of fun with it. They had these little competitions going. They're emailing me, telling me how much they enjoyed the badges. If there were any issues with the badges, I found out about it right away. So of course, my challenge in the future, this is fantastic, but my challenge will be to find ways to keep that badging program going in new, interesting ways. So in this presentation, we've talked about implementing a staff satisfaction survey. We've talked about staff scholarship program, staff appreciation awards, and badging systems. So I know it's a lot of information, but you have all your handouts, you got a copy of the PowerPoint, you'll get your recording. And so at the end of a session like this, I always just like to say, where do we go from here? And for me, the answer is that I just plan to continually improve existing programs, do that continual improvement process, look for new ways to improve our staff morale and our organizational culture. And for you, that answer might be different. So I realize, once again, I just want to recognize that due to the pandemic, especially, our libraries are in very different places across the country. But I do believe that wherever you are, morale matters, staff satisfaction does matter. It's not just, being kind of hippy dippy or something. It has a real business impact. And also it's just meaningful to people that you work with every day. So even if you need to start very small, just consider implementing one thing at a time, a step at a time, to let your staff know how much you appreciate them. All right, so we are right at 10 minutes until the end of this hour. And so that's pretty much perfect for what I wanted to do as far as leaving time for questions. You'll see that my contact information is on this slide. I am going to restart my video so you can see me again. And I just want to say that please feel free to answer questions, and then I will let you know if I feel like I cannot adequately answer a question today. And in that case, I will encourage you to email me, and my email information is there. So I believe that facilitators, are y'all going to read the questions out to me, or do I need to browse the chat here?
One of us can, I'll read the questions. This is Cindy.
Okay.
Let me see. One was, how often do you do the awards?
Annually.
Annually. Going back to anonymous submissions, how do you get your administration to buy into the value of anonymous submissions on a staff survey?
If you do not have anonymous submissions, people will not complete the survey. They won't answer the questions honestly. And so you won't actually get any usable, helpful, or relevant data from the survey. I think if you're concerned that perhaps your administrator will be worried about negative responses, remember that you control the data. So that person who's there saying, oh, my manager is so terrible and here's 10 reasons why, that can just be passed on privately to HR. That is not going to get shared with everyone. So I think you can reassure administrators that the data is going to be managed very well. But if you don't have anonymity, and you can actually do a lot of research on this topic, if you don't have anonymity, you really don't have a good survey.
Okay, next question. How and with whom do you share the staff satisfaction survey with? And does it go to the library board of trustees or stop with library administration?
It's so I may have already answered this question in a later slide than the person originally asked that question in, because I talked about we share the full data with administration, and then I usually have a more detailed report for managers. And then I ultimately will have a report that's a higher level report that goes to everybody. And so that will show like trends, overall data, and analysis. And I have shared some of that with the board before. Our board is, sort of medium interested in that. So that, usually we'll get like 90% of people saying they're satisfied or very satisfied or higher. So they like seeing that number, and then maybe a few suggestions for improvement. And that's really all your board will want to see, probably.
Okay, will you share a link for the report about staff satisfaction you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation?
Oh, yes, the one from Human Resources Management. Yes, I will. I'll make a note and I'll send that out.
Okay, and here's someone just a comment, which I thought was really interesting. I have a small staff of 13, and I just did a small appreciation for all of them with the anniversary of COVID. Got creative and got an inexpensive idea from Pinterest.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Let me see. You could, and then someone said you could do a badge board in your break room for those of us who work on a small budget.
Yes.
My old company, non-library, gave a golden toilet plunger for 10-year anniversary gifts. Crazy, but it worked. It's truly all about the presentation.
I love it. I love it.
So let me check. Oh, and someone says, the great book I'd recommend along these lines is The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace by Gary Chapman.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Just scroll down. Okay, so then someone asked a question about the person, where did you get what did you do? The person Doreen, who asked about got the Pinterest idea. So, okay.
Someone did ask for suggestions for making it anonymous when you have a small staff, like when you do a survey, how can you ensure that it's anonymous? Because they said, I recognize everyone's handwriting and a Google form requires you to see who it is coming from.
Well, if you recognize everyone's handwriting, you probably want to have them type their answers. You're going to want to have probably just Likert scale questions, then a very limited, probably no demographic questions, very limited free text answer type of questions. Because again, I can tell as a trainer, I go around to a lot of different branches and departments and so forth. So I can sometimes even tell by the way somebody words someone, I can tell who it is. And then I think if you do figure out who someone is who's responding, your responsibility then as the point person for the survey would be to not be retaliatory in any way if the person shared criticism or constructive opportunity for change, but to not talk to them about it or not reveal that not punish them for our response. So sometimes I've heard stories, in a small department where someone's just doing a survey with maybe 10 people, it's very likely that you might find out who it is. And you just have to remove yourself from the process as much as possible.
Okay, I see Doreen had made some comments, so I'll read those quickly. I did 2 different thoughts: nacho average employee with nachos and salsa, and you are terrific tea bags with a small reusable teacup. And just thank them for their dedication. It was an inexpensive way to thank them for their commitment. We started curbside May 6th and opened on July 6th, so they've been working hard.